Mike, when we look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that they've been pretty clear, at least from Brendan Shanahan and Kyle Dubas, not to expect very many changes this offseason. And, I think that makes sense when you take a look at the success that the Toronto Maple Leafs team had in the regular season, with the fact that they've given the Tampa Bay Lightning to this point, New York Rangers notwithstanding, and the result of that series still in the balance. We don't know what's going to happen there in terms of trying to, did they give the Lightning, the two-time champs, the best run for their money? To this point, they have. I don't know. I wouldn't make very many changes when you take a look at this Toronto Maple Leafs roster. There's always going to be some changes, and I think it's going to be interesting with Ilya Mikheyev, a guy that they cannot afford to keep, and it looks like Mike McKenna has returned here. Mike, when you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and their roster, what is their top priority? Is it in goal?
Yeah, I think for sure. You just need, and more than anything, they just need clarity because you've got Mrazek for the next few years at $3.8 million. And whoever ends up in the net for the Toronto Maple Leafs, if it's Jack Campbell or if it's somebody else, Kyle Dubas isn't going to bring in a slouch here on $1 million deal, man. Like he's going to bring in a goaltender that can play, and that's going to cost. You're looking anywhere from $4 to $6 million for a starting goaltender in whatever that term may be. And do I think Campbell's in that mix? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dubas has a great handle on what Campbell is capable of. And when you look at the UFA market, where do you want to go? I mean, do you try to go after a Kemper? Do you try to go after a Ville Husso or a Fleury? Other people we'll talk about in a second here. I'm curious about that because I think it needs to be straightened out first. You don't want to be tied up with $8 or $9 million in goal without really having somebody you trust. So that's number one for me, Frank. But I'm also just curious to see if Dubas doesn't make a play for a D-man. And I would not rule out making a real hockey trade here. Okay. Like I know that Sandin and Liljegren are still developing. You've got to keep them in-house. But they still are in a win-now mode. And I think they're one defenseman away. I wonder if Dubas doesn't make one big swing here, Frank. I don't expect it, but I wouldn't rule it out here. Do you have that impression at all?
I mean, as much as they'd like to, they still have salary cap issues to contend with. They still need to pay a goalie. Even if you think Jack Campbell is going to be your guy and you want to try and get him on a bit of a discount versus what you thought he might have been costing as you got to December. You think December probably in the $5.5 million range. He's probably a lot less than that now, but still it's going to be more than you were paying Campbell previously. And you're going to have to account for that on your cap. That money is going to have to come from somewhere. As I mentioned, Ilya Mikheyev is a guy that the Leafs probably aren't going to be able to afford. He's likely going to walk. Then you've got, what do you do with Alexander Kerfoot? He's a guy that they probably can't afford to pay that much money for the production that they ended up getting out of him. So maybe you could move Kerfoot and create some flexibility there. But a lot of the money that they have available is going to be going towards their netminder. So it's going to be a really big decision to make in goal, probably starting first with that and then seeing what you have left over to do on the back end.
Yeah, especially when you have, your top three forwards are all coming in kind of close to 11 million bucks on a cap hit. That restrains you. But I mean, I don't know, man. I even look outside the box here and I look at Nylander and wonder, like you just
no chance.
I wouldn't constrain myself if I was Dubas. But I think the realistic path here is probably towards tweaking this lineup because it was really strong.
Yeah, I just like people keep saying Nylander. I'm like, why? He's the best value contract you have on that team when you look at production versus what he's making. You have to keep a player like him when you're up against it cap wise. You might be able to try to get a lot for him, but I think every time you trade a player like that with that type of value contract, you're losing. And it'd almost be impossible to get apples to apples to have your team be just as competitive next season as they were last season. So I think that would be a mistake starting with Nylander. If you wanted to pluck another player from that big three or core four, go ahead and try. I just don't think it's happening. And I think they have to try and continue to nibble around the edges.